Ana Saldanha, I'm going to present her to present our last guest. Ana Saldanha is a full professor at Hunan Normal University. She has been an invited associate professor at Macau Polytechnic University and a senior instructor at the University of Macau. She holds a PhD from the Université Stendhal-Grenoble III, Lettres, Langues et Sciences Humaines, and a PhD from the School of Arts and Humanities of the University of Lisbon, Comparative Literature. She has been a professor and a researcher in France, Romania, French Guiana, and Brazil. Her academic work focuses on literature and society of Portuguese-speaking countries, on Latin America, Latin American literature, on Chinese and Macanese literature, and so on. Ana Saldanha published 2 books of chronicles and 3 books on Portuguese and Brazilian literature and culture. So welcome, Ana. Welcome. I'm going to finish the presentation. Wait a second. Are you there, Ana? Yes.
Estou aqui.
Olá.
Hello. Olá.
Bem-vinda. I would also like to ask Professor Van Dan to give permission to Ana Saldanha to share a presentation, because I believe she has one. Okay. So welcome, Ana. Thank you so much for joining us here in this last session. As you can see, it's a very lively group of people. We are reading and loving this novel. And so I would start by asking you, when did you how did you come across with this novel? Was it your first Cardoso Pires novel, or how was your reading how was your reading Cardoso Pires experience, biographical experience? Tell me.
First of all, thank you very much, João, for the invitation. Thank you for all for being here. I'm in China, so if there is some problems with the connection, it's my internet, so I apologize if sometimes if eventually or if finally there's a problem. I will give the same answer that a colleague have already given before when you made that question. I don't remember when it was the first time. My father was a good reader, and so he had all the books of one of the authors. He had the complete books of José Cardoso Pires, and I don't remember when it was the first time. I pick one. I really don't remember. But some years ago, one of my research interests was and it still is, but I worked for some years between the connections and the dialogue between the Carnation Revolution and literature. And so it was on this moment that I crossed again the path and the literature of José Cardoso Pires. And I worked mostly with 2 of his books published after the Carnation Revolution. So Alexandra Alfa, that was published in 1987, and BALADA da Praia dos Cães, that it was his first novel published after the Carnation Revolution. This book, mostly it is curious because it is a book that does not speak about the Carnation Revolution, but we cannot understand it without knowing that this revolution happened in Portugal. So it was this aspect. The Carnation Revolution is not present. It never appears. But in reality, it's latent. It's, I don't know if this word exists in English, latent. So it is always present. it is like something that we know that is there, but it is not. It is not on the diegetic narrative. So, and it was this aspect that made me choose. It was one of the books that I chose to do some of my research, including in my PhD. And so it's that this mainly it is this how a revolution can be present in a book if it is not present in the diegetic, if it is not present on the narrative. How this happens? How can we read it? Do we know what we must know about this to understand this book? Because it was written in 82, even if the story it's on the 60s that it's going on.
Okay. So I have here a quote from Ana Saldanha. I'm going to share it with you. Okay. So Ana Saldanha says, despite intending to overthrow the dictatorial order, Dantas managed to recreate the same social organization of the dictatorship inside Casa da Vereda. This is, therefore, an allegory of Salazarist Portugal, or a social microcosm in which the external functioning and organization are repeated and recreated, exemplifying the prevailing social imaginary. So I think this is a good quote to start our conversation, right? Because there's this house, but this house is the entire country, where there is a dictator also. The Dantas Castro becomes a dictator himself. It started by fighting against the dictatorship. He was a rebel, so he was a part of a coup d'etat. But then he becomes himself a dictator inside of his house, and he becomes a relation of violence with all the characters living in there. So I think this could be a good starting point, Anna. So I would ask you to comment this and put it in a larger.
So, Balada da Praia dos Cães, in reality, is Portugal. It's like we are seeing Portugal through these lines, and Portugal, it is closed. So there's so many closed. There are a lot of closed. How to say it? Closed scenes inside this ballad. For example, the lizard is inside a closed. How to call it in English?
Environment, aquarium. Okay.
Yes, aquarium. It is a closed aquarium. Elias, when he's in his house, it's a closed environment. Where he works, it's a closed environment. When the spaces outside, when they are open, they are gray. They are gray, and we see anyone. We don't see anything. Mostly we hear some things. So Casa da Vereda, thank you, because there was a mistake on the original text, and you corrected it. Yes, I saw it. Then I will tell you. And so Casa da Vereda is also, it's like Portugal, is closed. And Major Dantas, in reality, he's a man of the regime. He's a man of the dictatorship. He was an official. He was on the army. So all his imaginary, all the way he thinks, the way he sees the world, the way he reads the world, he grew up in the dictatorship. He assimilated all the ideas or all the ideals of the dictatorship. In a certain moment, exactly like Henrique Calvão, that is exactly the man that Dantas, Major Dantas, he says it is the hero, and he imagined that he will be the real hero in a certain moment of the narrative. He says this. So it is the man of the regime that changes and understands that it is necessary to do some changes, but in a certain way. It is at the same time there are a lot of a cosmovision and the way of reading reality that is the same of the regime. He cannot be completely he cannot complete it outside. He doesn't give a big step. He gives us a small step. So finally he tries to overthrow a regime, but in a moment he talks about also, but he does not like communists. So okay, I going to overthrow. I want to overthrow this, but not with all. So not with all. There's always this ambiguity. And finally, when he's in a closed environment, he does exactly the same. He repeats exactly the same inside the Casa da Vereda. It's exactly the same organization that is outside. So finally, he will repeat the same type of violence, the same type of psychological violence, physical violence, and he imagines himself like you said, like a dictator. He emerges like also a dictator, and curiously, he will be killed. And curiously, is exactly what will happen with the dictatorship in Portugal. It will be killed in a certain way. So what happens in Casa da Vereda is like an allegory what happens in Portugal at that moment. That's why the Portuguese Revolution is so important, because the author, so Cardoso Pires, he knows the future. The characters, that they don't know the future, so they don't know what the future will bring. But Cardoso Pires knows, and through the characters, through this history, through this real history, he will already announce what will happen in Portugal. That's why the Portuguese Revolution is so important to understand and underlies in reality all this story.
Okay, and there's also well, I have so many questions, but especially concerning the body, the human body. It's the portrayal of the human body is it's a human body in decay at the beginning, right? It's a body that is being eaten by dogs. It's a decay body. It's also a diseased a body with some kind of disease, because Elias becomes ill at a certain point. He's feverish and all that, and then we have we have fake hair that starts to be an entity right in the beginning. The man that has a toupee, and the toupee is speaking. It's giving a testimony of the testimony to the police. And so we have a speaking toupee. We have a nail that also is an entity on its own. So we have this fragmented body, like the narrative is fragmented, like the society is fragmented into different cells. As you said, the house is a cell. Everyone is isolated from the outside world in a certain way, and everyone is under surveillance, like the lizard, and like everyone, like Mena. She's even there's a scene of a peep show, right? When the Elias looks at her when she's changing her clothes, as if she was stripping for him, So there's this invasion of private space, but people are still pretty much isolated from one another. And Elias is a lonely character that goes to the cemetery in the spare time, and lives with the photographs of dead relatives at home, with a lizard inside. A lizard that is a projection of himself, of course. So this. I think that the portrayal of the human body and is very significant. It's very meaningful because it's also a portrayal of the body of society. Society is like this body is in it's in how do you say? Um, it's a body in decay, a body that is it's not a vigorous body. It's the opposite of that. It's an impotent body. Another issue that arises in this novel.
Yes, I think all the novel is an allegory. So we are looking at Portugal. So that body is Portugal. Portugal is in decadence. Not the dictatorship is in decadence. So it is being eaten by internal, not only external, but internal problems. So the dogs eat the body. In Casa de Fsada, the problems start inside. Everything starts by the inside, like Portugal, like the dictatorship. Inside, it's like decaying, it's dying, it's a slow die. That's what you talk about, the fragment body and the fragment discourse, that often it is assimilated to a postmodernist novel, for example. I don't agree with that view. I think more these fragments is more like we have to see it like a totality. I'm using here a Marxist category. In a certain way, I think we cannot understand these fragments. We cannot understand these fragment body, the fragment discourse, the fragments, the hallucinations that appear here and there, the symbols that appear here and there, like the nail, for example. They dialogue. So they are not turning. They are not. There's a dialogue between them, and it is all of this. It's all this totality that allow us to understand what is going on in the novel and in Portugal, in the society in Portugal. So I would read this fragmented discourse, or the fragments that we can find through the narrative, as the decadence of the dictatorship. And even and about, for example, the lizard is, as you said, is clearly, it's a reflection of Elias. But there's a colleague that have written about this, and he says something that makes sense. It is like the lizard is a reptile, so the lizard is something that needs hot, that needs also to be with other lizards, to have small lizards. So he has to reproduce himself, and that he's in a closed environment, and it is so closed, and everything is so oppressive, that even the sexuality, as we have talked, other colleagues have talked about that also, is also oppressive. So, for example, Elias in the cage, he does everything in order to the lizard do not have an environment where he wants to reproduce himself. So he controls the temperature, he controls the temperature and the elements that are inside the aquarium where the lizard is. And at the same time, this is also Elias, that is always repressing himself. And when the sexual repression is too strong, what happens? It's those kind of hallucinations. And once again, reality and fiction are mixed. It's not only the reality and the fiction of the real story, and the ballad of the BALADA, the Praia dos Cães, is also in the lives of those characters. Sometimes we don't know what is fiction and what is reality. Both are always dialogue each other. So I think this kind of fragmentation that we talk about, that is often talked about BALADA, the Praia dos Cães, is mostly something. Yes, it's true, it happens, but it cannot be read. Everything has to be read like a dialogue to understand something much bigger. And this much bigger is the dictatorship that is dying, like that is being eaten by inside, like the body of Major Dantas is being eaten by the dogs.
Okay.
Sorry,
Okay.
it's not best.
No, mine isn't also, so it's okay. Okay, so you have prepared the presentation, right, Ana
Yes.
Saldanha? So let's perhaps move there.
So I will try to speak a little bit about something that I have spoken about already, the historical time, the narrative time, and the writing times. João already in other presentations have talked also about these 3 times that are present in Balada da Praia dos Cães. And I would start saying that since other works from José Cardoso Pires, for example, O Anjo Ancorado, or O Hóspede de Job, or Delfim, or even those published after the Portuguese Revolution, they have a focus on the problematic of the Portuguese identity during the dictatorship. So in a certain way, all these stories are the novels that he wrote are like parts that added together and end up talking about the problematic identity of a country that is divided between backwardness and development, between the rural and urban, between, in short, tradition and modernity. And so, and it is through the critique and through the problematization of a nationalist mythology that it is what happens during the Portuguese dictatorship that Cardoso Pires allegorizes the Portuguese space and will construct a fictional discourse on historical known realities. Estou no 4, João. So, through the study of the fictionality of José Cardoso Pires, mainly in what is important here, Balada da Praia dos Cães, we will try to think about this duality, historical time, narrative time, and try to analyze, to understand the literary representation of the Portuguese dictatorial period, of the dictatorship. So, it is not very important for the discussion here, but I would like also to talk about this. I think that historically, literarily, I consider that this novel includes neo-realist elements, and so it can be said that this novel is a higher, like, it's not the only one, it's a higher of a fiction that never ceases to contextualize the country, establishing a new moment in the author's literary career. So now to talk a little bit about the literature and the Portuguese Revolution, to understand better the moment when this ballad, when the Balada da Praia dos Cães was published. It is a fact that the April Revolution allowed the construction of a new era. So this revolution cannot be ignored and was not ignored by the artistic and literary movement. So, estou no 7. So, therefore, the analysis of the literary production of the decades that followed the Carnation Revolution will not ignore this important historical moment. And the relationship between contemporary Portuguese literature and the Portuguese Revolution is present in a lot of authors, for example, José Saramago, or Alexandre Pinheiro Torres, or Hélder Macedo, that João talked here in one of his presentations he quoted Hélder Macedo here in one of his presentations. So the post-revolution Portuguese literature is marked by a renewal of the novel. And this renewal of the novel will follow the evolution and the changes of the historical context that was lived, keeping awake or keeping present the recent past. So, and fiction and reality are often mixed in order to construct this reflection, to understand the recent Portuguese past. So, there's a clear relationship between the political transformations occurred in Portugal after the Carnation Revolution and with the artistic production that followed, mostly on end of 70s and beginning of the 80s. So, as the philosopher, the Portuguese philosopher Eduardo Lourenço said, literary production in the first years following the Portuguese Revolution was scarce, but it was mainly from the 80s onwards, Balada da Praia dos Cães was published in 82, that freedom allowed an explosion of artistic creation. And so, before the Portuguese Revolution, there was censorship. And so everything that was published before the Portuguese Revolution, so during the dictatorship, was censored. And we call it the censor's blue pencil, because often it was used a blue pencil. Not always, but very often it was a blue pencil that was used. Here are real images of the censorship. And so a lot of authors have passed under the watchful eye of the censor's blue pencil. For example, Virgílio Ferreira, for example, Urbano Tavares Rodrigues or Miguel Torga, and naturally, José Cardoso Pires. Or, before the Portuguese Revolution, censorship inhibited the author's own creative act. So, in a certain way, censorship created also a self-censorship that instinctively was present in all writings of a lot of writers. And so that's why if Balada da Praia dos Cães was published after the Portuguese Revolution, there was no self-censorship. So this book could never have happened before the Portuguese Revolution, because if it was published before, probably it would be not accepted by censors. Probably the author José Cardoso Pires would be obliged to change the novel in order to be able to publish. So all this literature have necessarily we need to look at this literature published after the Carnation Revolution as something that would not be possible before. About the question of fragmentation or neorealist legacy, I would like just to say very quickly that Carlos Reis, for example, he speaks about a neorealist legacy. And what is this neorealist legacy? He says that it is the inscription of some technical, formal, and thematic literary components from the neorealist code, but subjected to an individualized discursive reformulation. So what we can say is that the literary production of Cardoso Pires is higher to a set of neorealist norms and conventions. So even if Carlos Reis does not talk about his legacy after on the works that were published after the Portuguese Revolution, I consider that this neorealist legacy can be extended to the decades that follow the April Revolution. So it can be a literary categorization that can be conferred, for example, to Balada da Praia dos Cães. And why? So, postmodernism implies a non-historical, a non-scientific, a skeptical view in relation to any social or other progresses. What is not the case of José Cardoso Pires. Cardoso Pires is not a skeptical. On the opposite, Cardoso Pires, he has a view and a view of a future that is, he believes in the progress, if we want, of the humankind. So, regardless this historical literary problematization, I want to note that many of the novels that were born after the Carnation Revolution will disarticulate patriarchal and imperialist images and discourses that were used during the Portuguese dictatorship, and that the desacralization of ancestral myths, and I'm quoting, is an attitude common to the Portuguese intellectuality after the Carnation Revolution, mainly on the 70s and on the 80s. So, José Cardoso Pires is one of the authors that will launch himself against the mythological references of the culture propagated by the dictatorship. And so he will, and I'm quoting, he will, above all, he will disarticulate the ideal image that the Portuguese had forged on themselves and their homeland over 500 years. So, Balada da Praia dos Cães is the first novel that Cardoso Pires will publish after the revolution and develops a narrative discourse that will problematize, as we said, the Portuguese society. Based on real archives, which access before 74 would be very, very difficult, it is based on a true story of the assassination, as you know, of an army captain whose body was found on a beach. So, and as I said just some minutes ago, Cardoso Pires will write without the ties of allegory that he would have had to resort to if he had written the novel before 74. So it is through the voice of an investigator of the police, judiciary police, not the political police, on whose figure the narrative is centered. And it is through this narrative that we can follow the atmosphere of the city of Lisbon, that we can follow the relations between the regime and the police, and that we can follow the political context of the time, marked by the omnipresence of Salazar. So, the protagonist, Elias, is the narrator himself. But this narrator, his reflections, his working methods, his opinions are completely different from those defended by the author Cardoso Pires. So, when the narrator, Elias, when he narrates, the sense of sight continues to belong to Elias. So, when it is not Elias narrating, the sense of sight continues to belong to Elias. So, Cardoso Pires, we can say that Cardoso Pires will use a narrator character, ideological, very different from himself. So, he will use a contradictory discourse that allows the transparency of his own critical opinion of the social order and values of the narrative time. So this is an ironic distance. And this ironic distance between the narrator and the author, the narrator Elias and the author, is a stylistic feature of this ballad. So the lecturers who read this ballad We don't trust Elias. When Elias speaks, we don't like Elias. We are like Cardoso Pires arrives to put us in a very in a way very far away from Elias. We don't like this character. He causes repulse. So by basing the narrative on a real fact, Cardoso Pires will articulate a fictional discourse and a historical discourse. So the realistic novel and a novel of invention, in a certain way, they will be one. And it is José Cardoso Pires himself who talks about an invented memory. So he situates this novel in an inventive memorial space. So he will locate the fictional discourse. He exists in a certain historical context. So 22 years after their appearance, the facts will become memory, the memory will become invention, and the invention will become literature.
Yes, and this is also connected with what we spoke of today. That you know the quote where the narrator addresses specifically the criar memória, that idea of create memory that we spoke of today. It's exactly the same.
The fiction and the reality, we don't know. We don't know. It's when we were talking about Arquiteto Fonte Nova. Reality, it's a fictional character based on a real character, but both became one. So in a certain way, when he speaks, he speaks with the real. We can say he spoke with the real person. Yeah, the real. Yes, Jacques. He spoke with the real one. But in a certain way, they become one. We don't know where is the real one and the fake one. Finally, so that's the invented memory.
I think there's a split of the author. The author splits and becomes fictional himself. You know, that's the thing. I think the author himself becomes a character. It becomes is a part of the fiction. It becomes part of is sucked into the fiction, you know.
Yes,
and that's
yes.
that's for me. It's really, really interesting, I think.
Yes, yes. So talking about this, the report of a real dead corpse will serve. José Cardoso Pires will do a reflection on the power of the regime and on the violence and on the oppression, having as a starting point a true story. So historical fidelity is placed at the service of fictional freedom. So through a discursive process in which the author reflects on the knowledge of himself and on the recent historical events. And gradually, I think that this reflection will become the main theme of the work, so that the resolution of the crime that initially was the main theme will become the background of the narrative. So there's also the deconstruction of a triad, a triad that was very present on the discourse on during the dictatorship: God, homeland, and family. So this triad will be constantly deconstructed and demythologized through the narrative. So it was first used to justify the regime's anti-communism and to feed the myth of conspiracy, and this trilogy underlaid the justification for a ferocious repression. And Cardoso Pires will, for example, there's a passage here. I will just read the end, the passage of Balada da Praia dos Cães, where it says about a minister of the interior is speaking, and he says, he speaks of the security of people and property and declares eternal war on agitators who, in the pay of foreigners or inspired by ideas of debauchery, intend by all means to corrupt the school and work, to deny morals and faith, and to call into question authority. So, Salazar is assisted by the army. Both are deified by a church that places them in the range of mortals who approach God. And Salazar, estou na 26. Salazar, so a historical figure who marked Portuguese life by his omnipresence, becomes an equally omnipresent character, especially through the various photographic images that will appear in different moments of the narrative. And the other colleagues have already spoken about this question. So, Salazar is like a chief that is always present and that is always watching over the smallest corners of the country, including the public space, including the spaces that are under surveillance and under police authority. So there's now another deconstruction made by Cardoso Pires, and the image is of the film of José Fonseca Costa, the image that we can see here. And so Cardoso Pires will also deconstruct the masculinization of the hero, the Salazar, the army, through the deconstruction of the masculinization of Major Dantas C. For example, President Tomás looks like a decrepit penis, and this decrepit penis in reality is announcing a new time. So, and by removing the virility necessary for the system, for the social organization to be like it is, Cardoso Pires will deprive for example, Major Dantas will be no longer able to have sexual reports, for example, and so through the deconstruction of the masculinization, in reality, he is talking about the decrepitude of an order of values, and consequently the degeneration of an imaginary that were during many years underlined the dictatorship. So, in another, José Cardoso Pires, as I told, he knows the future in relation to the present. So he can foreshadow a new era, and consequently he can announce the destruction of the present of the narrative. And there are a lot of historical facts, and the historical facts are not limited to the simple murder of an army captain. There are several historical occurrences and experiences that are mentioned throughout the narrative. For example, the description of the omnipotence and the repression of the censorship in Portugal, that we have talked about already. For example, the interrogations that the police does, the insisted and the invasion of the intimacy of the alleged criminals that João has spoken about also. And so Cardoso Pires spoke about the invasion of individual space. And so all this is to speak about the repression of the dictatorship and the repression of the police, and mostly of the repression of the political police, PID. And so the methods that were used by the judiciary police and the methods used by Elias were therefore an example of the violence inherent to the functioning of the dictatorship. And censorship, that is also present, and it was also a reality. Censorship is present in BALADA in the daily life. And censorship allowed disinformation and propaganda and revealed another form of psychological violence. And there is something here, another historical event. There's a moment where he speaks about the clandestine reading of documents of newspaper, of something that, and I quote, that we could run like venom through the crack of the citizen's door, and that could be swallowed in 3 stages or smoked at the end of a match in case of distress. This is a very particular reference. It is a reference to a clandestine newspaper and called Avante. And this newspaper was published in a very thin paper. So the paper is very, very thin. So it was very easy to put it under the doors. It was very easy to eat it. I imagine it's not very healthy, but we could eat it anyway. And we could, it burned very, very, very fast. So this is a reference to the clandestine lectures that Portuguese made to understand the reality of Portugal. So censorship and repression were always present in all the lives of the Portuguese people, like censorship and repression is present in BALADA da Praia dos Cães. Other historical events, for example, some people that Cardoso Pires speaks about, for example, in a moment, he speaks about a military, estou no 33. In a moment, he speaks about a military, a commander, and who does not wear a monocle, but could very well use it because he has the face for it. And he's talking about the figure of General António Spínola. And because Cardoso Pires has an historically compromised discourse, in reality, he uses this mention to a real person, a real commander, and a general, General António Spínola. He speaks about him to say, be careful with this person. When he will appear in political life in Portugal, please be careful. Once again, the reality and the fiction are constantly dialogating, in dialogue. And curiously, it is the Major Dantas, Major that will assume himself like a small dictator in Casa da Vereda. It is precisely this Major who will announce the advent of the Portuguese Revolution. And he says, what they know is that when audacity is going to fall on them, that is what plots them, and it will. And when it falls, it leaves them no way out, because everything has been studied and with all the margins of risk. This is what will happen in the future of the present of the story. So this future, it is a past in relation to the time this story is the future of the 60s, as also been foreshadowed through a metaphorical description of the sky in the month of April. And I quote, when the blue of April was turned by the groove of a jet plane on its way to infinity. It will be in the same month of April, 14 years after the facts described and narrated, that the dictatorship will fall. And in a moment, a paratrooper soldier sits next to Elias, and he seems to have seated there from heaven. He doesn't know where this character.
Well, and the reference to that plane that crosses the sky in April, it also makes sense with the repeated reference to the publicity to TAP, where it says Portugal, Europe's best kept secret. Fly TAP. TAP is the Portuguese airline. And this publicity appears in the first pages of the book, and then it appears again by the end of it. So it's a kind of ironic reference, because even though we can fly, the country as a country is closed in itself, so it's a fake, it's an illusion of an openness, it's like it's an illusion, but then it's an illusion that will make sense in the future. So this is like it's like yes, it will make sense in 74. This ad will make sense.
And I think there's also another thing interesting with that the quote TAP. The most Portugal is the most hidden. How it is the quote?
Gem. Yes.
Gem. Yes, because it's like Salazar said that we are very well when we are alone. Portugal is very well alone. So it's also
a hidden gem
of we are very well when we are alone. So we are like a gene. So come to discover us, orgulhosamente sós. It's also a reference to this idea.
Okay, but when we see a plane crossing the sky in April, we see that perhaps in April things will be different. This will stop being ironic, right? That's
right.
Okay.
Right.
No.
So, and we have talked about this already. So the character of Major Dantas, he's a military. So he's a career officer, and we can follow through this character the process of political, ideological transformation to which he was subjected. So he was educated in a Catholic environment. He attended the parades of the Mocidade Portuguesa. It was like an organization for the young boys of Portugal, and it was a way of how to say it, João, help me. Mocidade Portuguesa.
Propaganda.
And so slowly he will transform himself into an anti-Salazarist man, but he maintained certain mental and cultural traits conveyed by the dictatorship. So, for example, and I quote, when he signed C could mean, and I'm quoting, but Castro or 100, and as it could mean commander or condor or knight. So it was like he was in between. He was in between, and he intended to remain the guide of Casa da Vereda. And so the relationship of love that he had the relationship of lover that linked him to Mena also dependent constantly on his supervision and orders. So women should depend on men wills. Women should depend on men. Otherwise, women would be subject to intrusive male violence. And you have already read, so there's a passage that is a little bit strong about this violence against women. And I will just read the beginning. He stripped her naked behind the dressing gown. He tore blankets, sheets, everything away, everything for the corridor. So from the door of the room, Dantès measured it as if it were a spectacle of misery. So, intending to be a guide, intending to be a hero, Dantès found in other Portuguese figures the heroism that he believed he could be also an hero. So one of the figures he refers is Henrique Galvão, who had starred in the assault of the Santa Maria liner, and for the major, it was the reincarnation of the Portuguese hero. So, despite intending to avert the social dictatorship, Major Dantas, in reality, he had recreated the same social organization inside Casa da Vereda. So this is an allegory of the dictatorship, and here appears the quote that João spoke about. So it is a social microcosm in which the external functioning and organization of the Portuguese society are repeated and recreated inside Casa da Vereda. And in the social deconstruction that Cardoso Pires carries out, sexuality will occupy an important place. And as I spoke a little already, Cardoso Pires will attack the virility intrinsic to the dictatorial, imaginary, and social organization. Thus, Elias, attending to the values defended by the binomial dictatorship religion, represses his sexuality and will resort to masturbation or to prostitution to calm down his viral ghosts, if we want. So, Elias sees, like, once again, we have a character that sees woman like a human being that should be at the service of the male sexual needs. So, but masculinity can lose, estou no 42, masculinity can lose its strength and means when it is placed before feminine beauty or a body, a woman, a naked woman. And it can lose its strength also in the face of the inability to accept woman's sexual freedom. And it's here that Mena is very important. So, Mena, the next one, João. Thank you. Mena represents the reverse of the sexual imagery of the regime. It symbolizes the female sexual evolution, breaking the conventions of sexuality and morality in force. And I quote, because since she was a person, she knows that this country is smart and all moral, that it even annoys. It needed to be pasteurized with shit from end to end. So the sexual deconstruction will involve the recurrence of taboo themes of sexuality, such as woman pleasure or even lesbianism. And
gay cruising also in the end. Right?
Sorry? João, sorry.
Also gay cruising. It appears there's that the military that approaches Elias for a sexual encounter. You remember that?
Exactly.
Okay.
So, the sexual deconstruction that Cardoso Pires carries out will break one of the symbolic and cultural pillars of the dictatorship social imaginary. So Elias himself, whose values and ideas are the result of the ideas and values transmitted by the dictatorship, he himself, the character, deconstructs himself the imaginary that he himself represents. So it's like everything is decaying, and this sexual deconstruction shows also the decay, the end of social organization. And here, the decadence of the imaginary, of a subculture that was convinced, that was defended by the dictatorship, is also symbolized by the loss, and João talked about this, the loss of the Portuguese Indian colonies. And so, in reality, he's announcing the Portuguese Empire will end. Fortunately, it will end. So, once again, he knows the future, and so he's announcing something that will happen. And in this case, it happens in 61, so we are in the time of the narrative. But he announces more than this. He announces the colonies. Portugal will, in a moment, will no longer have colonies. So, and then it is in this moment that appears, but João talked about this very well, about the Indian issue. And to finish, I would like here to speak about also about another book de Maria Velha da Costa, Casas Pardas, because there are some similitudes. What do I mean? That in these two books, Balada da Praia dos Cães and in Casas Pardas, the historical time as a multifaced character. So there's a reflection, there's a problematization of life in Portugal, and this problematization, this reflection is based on their personal reflection and their own experience. So the authors will create an anachronistic narrative in relation to the historical moment in which they write. And so they will address themes, occurrences, feelings, environments prior to the present of writing. So that's why also the Carnation Revolution is narrated, even if it is not present in Balada da Praia dos Cães. So it is present without being present. We can say in a certain way that there were two distinct Carnation Revolutions. The historical, the real one, that occurred in 74, and the one that was lived or censored fictionally by the characters, or that will be in Balada da Praia dos Cães, will be announced by the characters through some lines. And about the representation of woman, like in Casas Pardas, there is one character, Elisa, like here in Balada da Praia dos Cães, there is Mena, and Elisa, like Mena, they both begin a process of self-knowledge, of self-inquiry in a and I'm quoting, conjunctural place that coincide with their time, and that coincides with the time of the history. So, Mena, in Balada da Praia dos Cães, will seek her own space, a space of her in the 60s, in this Portugal that is closed. She will look like for her own space, her own place to figure out where she could be placed in the time that she had to live. So, in other words, the binomial real national crisis. So, yeah, I mean, the time of crisis in which the regime had entered, it is the same than the fictional crisis of the characters. It means the time of personal crisis of the characters. So, we have, and last one,
Okay.
Vou passar já para o último. So, vou passar para o último. The crisis of the regime, it is the same that the crisis that the characters they are passing by. So, in short, what we are seeing is a global identity crisis which process and which construction and the construction accompanies the real historical history, the real historical becoming. Okay, and I finish.
Okay,
Sorry.
thank you so much.
Sorry
Thank you
for
so much, Anna. I'm sure, I don't know if you have questions. I do. But I would prefer if you would speak because I've been speaking a lot. So, Madame Sharda, please.
I have really a lot of questions, but I will not put it. At least some of the questions. Ma'am, thank you very much. It was very interesting how you presented the whole thing. And the first question, I'll just read out all my questions, then you can answer it. The first question what I have is, what is the main theme or message the story is trying to convey? That was the first question. And the second one was, are the characters based on real historical figures, because you made a presentation, or purely fictional? And then I have a question, what was the historical and political backdrop that inspired this story? And how does the setting Portugal influence the story's tone and events? How do the political movement in the story reflect real life events? And the last one I want to ask,
it was all real, Madame Sharda.
Yeah.
But it was all fictional at the same time.
Yeah, are there any specific historical events that parallel the story's plot?
Yes.
And the last question about Meena, which is my favorite character in this, how does Meena respond to authority figures like Elias? Does she challenge them, manipulate them, or surrender to them? In what ways that Meena's character represents societal double standards about women, sexuality, and agency?
Okay, that's a good question. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madame Sharda. I also addressed the first question in the first part of the today's session, Madame Sharda. So if you I don't know if it is possible, but perhaps I will send you the first part of the session, because that was a question of one of our readers. You know, what is fiction? What is true? What is fact? And so we addressed it in the first
I
part.
heard it. I heard it.
But please, Anna.
I will start by the last question, Meena, because I think it's we have all the same questions. I think João have some of the same questions. It's hard. It's hard to. I think it's not easy to understand Meena, so I will give my approach, but maybe it is not the same than the one that João shares. So then João will speak about this, and. So I think we should see Meena in the historical context, the real historical context. So before the Coronation Revolution, women social, politically, on the legislation, they did not have the same rights than men. So, for example, I have made some notes about this, so I have to look at it. Sorry. So, for example, women could only work with authorization of their husband. Women, their salaries were 40% less than men. Women could not be judge, diplomats, police. Women could not travel alone out of the country without authorization, the written authorization of the husband. For example, nurses, stewards could not marry. Teachers could marry, but the man had to prove he had enough money. He earned more money than the woman. My grandfather did this with my grandmother. He had to prove he had enough money to sustain my grandmother. And so they could not vote. Women could not vote. So this is very new. The rights that women have in Portugal are very new. 50 years is nothing. It's yesterday, right? So I think we have to see men in this context. So she's a rebel. As I read it, she's a rebel, but in an oppressive environment. And the way she has to show her, how to say it, to show that she has not her place in this society is to be ambiguous. I don't know if Cardoso Pires, he wanted to create an ambiguous or a woman that we cannot read, or if he, as an author, he could read it completely. I don't know if he could. But I think she has to be like this because it is the way that she had to survive in the Portuguese society of that time. So I think this, but I don't have an answer. So the way she responds to the authority of men, she was submissive. It is true, but without her, nothing would be possible. She was submissive, but Major Dantas depended on her. Even emotionally, he depended on her. So I think there's an ambiguity that is hard. I'm afraid of saying something that I should not. So I think that I would like to hear João also about this character and the difficulty we have to understand this female character. Yes. But I think the first thing is to understand this character in the cultural and historical context of the time.
Well, going back to the parallel that you made between Casas Pardas and this one, and this book, Ballad. In Casas Pardas, the character of Elisa is trying to write a book. And she's trying to write a book as a woman writer. You know, she's trying to find a voice as a woman writer, and so we get we get access to her mind, and we get access to what her motivations are. In terms of Mena, I think Mena is a more elusive kind of character. She's always escaping all of our attempts to understand her. You know, that's why she's so rich as a character. She's always escaping us. There's a statement from her friend that I put it there. A statement from Nora, from her friend, her student friend. And she says, she's addressing the men. She's addressing the policemen, but she's addressing men in general, I think. And she asks a rhetorical question. She says, are you so desperate for a woman that you have to invent one? Or in Portuguese, pá, mas afinal vocês estão assim tão necessitados que até têm que inventar uma mulher. So this is what what we are dealing here is with the invention of a woman. The woman has to create a space for her to live, you know. She has to invent a place because she doesn't have a place, you know. And so that's why we get to Mena, of course, but through Elia's eyes. And he of course, he doesn't understand her because she doesn't occupy the place that she should occupy. You know, she's of course she at the first when we look at it at first. She seems to be submissive to Major Dantes, but at the end we get the sense that probably she was very much in power of her own sexual desire to be submissive, you know, to be masochist, to humiliate herself as a part of a sexual role play, you know. That kind of explanation becomes very, very vivid towards the end. And so I think this we are all, even the reader, the author, the narrator, the investigator, we are all trying to figure this woman out, but we can't, so we have to invent one to get close to her, you know. she's completely out of this world in a sense. She's completely different of what she should be, you know. So of course we have to read her, we have to understand her in the context of what women were supposed to be, but only to understand that probably it's it's not, we are not sure about anything, but probably to understand that she wasn't any of those things she was supposed to be, you know. So that's the thing. She's a character that we have to invent. Okay.
Yes, and like you said, she had to invent the place for herself also. That's why I spoke about the crisis of the characters also.
Yes.
She has no place. She should be married. She should be with a man, married in an apartment. She had all the conditions. She was a beautiful woman. So apparently she had all the conditions to be like, to follow what the society attended from her, but she didn't follow this path. She didn't, and she was conscious of this. So it was, in a certain way, it was a choice also of her. So, like you said, she has to invent a place where she could find herself and find her own place, her own space.
Yeah, and like Elisa in Casas Pardas, Elisa is trying to create something anew, you know, something that doesn't exist. And her effort is only that. She's trying to, what's the quote? To write a book all female. You know, she's trying to write a book all female. That's a quote from Casas Pardas. So she's trying to do something that no one else has done before, and that's perhaps similar to what Mena was. And Mena was also in out of place. She was not well. We cannot put her in any categories because there wasn't one that fit her. You know. That's yes, Madame Sharda. Now, regarding the first questions, I'm not sure if Anna wants to address it once again. The questions of the real events and all that.
I think João have already spoke a lot about this, the real events, the historical events. So I don't know. I think
Yeah,
it's already answered, I would say.
It is a very important question, Madam Charles. It is a very important question, I think, but it was already addressed, you know. I don't know if anyone has any other questions. I'm very interested in this portrayal of sex and sexual life, you know, because there is this lack of vitality in everything, you know. The sex isn't vital. Sex is vice, is devious. There's deprivation also. We of course sex is a burden. Even we see a character that masturbates herself, so sexual is something to get rid of. Sex is violence, is violent. Sex is not doesn't not imply the touch of two bodies, because this book deals a lot with voyeurism, as we have seen. Characters that see from afar, and so the bodies don't touch. So this is a kind of sex is not vital. It doesn't bring life. It's not something positive. It's something a lot darker, I think. And I think that is quite interesting in this novel. I don't remember seeing anything like it in other novels. You know, something this dark. You know, it looks like a catalog of sexual misbehaviors. You know, it's very. I mean, it's shocking even. You know. But it is very interesting. It's not out of place, of course. It I mean, it has a lot to do with the kind of dark place Portugal was in the 60s. You know, it was a gray country, closed and under surveillance and with intimacy issues, of course. So it's
the repression occupies a lot of space, and the sexual repression occupies a lot of space, and we are oppressed. Naturally, our response are not always healthy, if I can say. So, like if we are sexually repressed, what happens is the worst side of us that appears in a certain way. So this repression, this oppression has to finish in order to see the other side of sexuality. So the healthy side, I think. Yeah, I think everything is connected with this idea, as you said, about oppression, repression. Portugal is closed, it's gray, it's heavy. Everything is heavy. Yeah, ghosts, hallucinations. So there's a lot of ghosts. Yes.
And dead people and graveyards and
yes, and dogs that eat human bodies.
Yeah, it's very okay. I don't know if you have any other questions. It was really an interesting session. Thank you very much, Anna.
Thank you, João.
No other questions. So we are way beyond our time. So I think we can finish here. I hope you enjoyed this collective reading experience, and I hope you feel curious about this author, and hopefully you will get the linguistic tools to read other books of Cardoso Pires in the original. We have most of his books I think all of his novels, we have it here in our library, in our public library. So you are most welcome here, okay, as always. So thank you very much. And I will see some of you, I'm sure, in the Portuguese cinema course in a couple of weeks. Okay, so thank you very much, and thank you, Anna, for a terrific session. This was a golden closure for this experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Obrigada.
Ciao, ciao.
Obrigado.
Obrigado.